I've never been the superstitious type. I'm a trained architect, rational by nature, and when I decided to buy a rural plot to build my own home, I didn't think twice when I saw the listing from the old Crosswell estate. The price was well below market value. The land was surrounded by preserved woodland, and a stream ran discreetly along the bottom of the slope. But no one told me, or dared to tell me, why the land had remained vacant for over 3 decades. If this story already makes you uneasy, maybe you should subscribe to the channel. Believe me, the revelations to come are even more disturbing. It was a gray Saturday in autumn when I signed the papers at a small real estate office in Stroudsburg. The agent hesitated before shaking my hand. Her name was Meredith, and her eyes seemed to search beyond me, as if a hidden reflection moved along the wall. Noticing my confusion, she gave a slight, strained smile and muttered, "Are you certain? The land remembers." That phrase echoed in my head for the entire drive to the property. The gravel road twisted between tall, wind-dried trees. The leaves, crimson and ochre, seemed to fall with unnatural slowness, as if hesitant to touch the ground. When I finally saw the stone marker engraved with the word Crosswell, I felt the air grow denser, and the silence absolute. No birds, no insects, just the old creaking of branches resisting time. There was no house left on the land. The original structure had been demolished in 1991 after an inconclusive fire, according to public records. In its place, an irregular concrete foundation still emerged from the earth, overrun by moss, exposed roots, and symbols carved deeply into each corner, almost erased by time. One resembled a circle sliced by 13 lines. Another, a reversed letter C, repeated 3 times around a single point. I spent the first night in the trailer I had rented to begin preliminary excavation work. Sleep didn't come easily. The wind whispered names I didn't recognize, and something in that whisper made me raise my eyes with the certainty someone was watching from the tree line. But whenever I stared into the woods, all I saw was motionless blackness. The next morning I found the first remnants. A rusted chain buried beneath the soil, attached to what looked like an iron ring embedded in a ritualistic stone. And in the center of the tree circle, where sunlight barely reached, a small stone altar covered in lichen, surrounded by melted candles and what appeared to be bird bones arranged in symmetrical patterns. I considered leaving. I thought about selling the land, forgetting that grim scenery, but something held me there. A strange familiarity, as if the land recognized me, as if it had been waiting. On the 3rd night, I dreamt of a woman dressed in black, holding a stained book. She stared at me blankly and repeated in a low voice, 13th cycle, the harvest, the return. When I woke up, I found footprints around the trailer, small, barefoot, like those of a child, but they were far too deep for a child. The next day, I returned to the real estate office. I wanted answers. Meredith wasn't there. In her place was an elderly man in an old blazer that smelled of camphor. He simply said, "You should have left it alone. Some names should never be spoken aloud." Before I could say more, he flipped the sign from open to closed and turned off the lights. It's difficult now to recall everything without feeling my skin crawl. But at the time, my curiosity outweighed my fear, and that's what doomed me. What I uncovered in the weeks that followed wasn't just a family history steeped in tragedy. It was a cycle, a pact, a dark legacy involving disappearances, rituals, and an entire community willing to protect a secret. And it all started with that symbol carved into the concrete, 13 lines through a circle, a number, a code, a warning. I first set foot on the Crosswell land in early spring, on a morning drenched in mist and subtle dread. Purchasing the parcel felt like acquiring a piece of history, something sealed away and forgotten. Precisely what I wanted. Yet the moment my car crunched onto the gravel drive, I felt immediately within something living yet dormant, as if decades of quiet anticipation had finally awakened. The deed arrived weeks earlier, dated on the 15th of March, 2024. It identified me as the latest in a long line of owners, though no one before had dared build or reside there for at least 32 years. I inherited no buildings, only a foundation. But tucked within the deed's appendix was a typed letter, apparently from one Vernon Crosswell, Roman numeral 13, written in full, Roman numeral 13, addressed to whomsoever may come after. It spoke cryptically, "This land remembers. It demands proper remembrance. Guard its silence." I recognized the same reversed C symbol drawn above the signature, hand-scrawled in faded ink, 3 times circling a small dot. The letter was dated 23rd of April, 1987. Vernon declared that his family's rituals had ended then, and yet implicitly warned that the legacy could not die. That single document marked the beginning of a tangled map I was determined to follow. I hired a local historian in the nearby township of Tannersville. She was Miss Devereaux, a woman in her early 80s, whose memory stretched back generations. When I mentioned Crosswell, her face lost color. She clutched at a locket, as if steadying herself. She told me that the Crosswells had settled that valley in the early 19th century, drawn by promises of long life and prosperity, but at a terrible cost. Every 20th year, on the night of the new moon in Roman numeral 13, 13 years counted fully, someone vanished. Always a child, always in the family, always preceded by a strange mark carved into a doorpost. 13 slash marks, or lines. She whispered that even local ministers had refused to bury the bodies properly. The churchyard next to St. Agatha's Lutheran still bore grave markers with scratched-out names. Fascinated, I dove into archives at the Monroe County Records Office. I unearthed birth and death registers. A child named Thomas Crosswell, born in 1887, died same day. Another Thomas, born in 1909, vanished without a trace at age 13. Then in 1922, a third Thomas disappeared, each instance linked to the symbol, Roman numeral 13, engraved in obscure registers or the building's posts. I cataloged each incident meticulously, noting the date, name, age, and witness depositions. Few and contradictory, yet consistent in tone. One entry described tremors in the night, screams drowned by the brook's roar. Another dwelled on the smell of burning wax and something feral, like a beast trapped beneath the ground. When I compared maps, I realized the Crosswell land absorbed boundary lines from 3 former parcels: the original homestead, an adjacent orchard, and what appeared to be a communal meeting grove. That grove, according to deeds from the early 1940s, was sold off, but with one clause: perpetual right of passage for southern communal use. In other words, villagers retained the right to traverse at any time. I discovered through town minutes that at least one neighborhood committee had requested removal of that clause in the 1980s, but the request was denied. No explanation was ever given. It dawned on me. The community was complicit, maintaining access, protecting the legacy. I began knocking on doors in neighboring houses. Few answered. One elderly woman, sitting on a porch swing, stared blankly when I mentioned Crosswell. She finally exhaled. Some names must die in silence. I pressed. Will you say the name? She shook. Thomas Crosswell. He came back. Her eyes dampened. I pressed further, but she refused to speak. At the site, I marked out future foundations. Beneath the remains of the cement slab, I found charcoal stains. Maybe where bonfires had raged, maybe where something else had burned. I unearthed small artifacts, scraps of textile with a blue thread border, same as the locket Miss Devereaux held, bone fragments shaped too deliberately to be random, shards of pottery marked with the reversed C motif. The pattern repeated, 3 inverted C's around a dot. I sketched each, labeled by coordinate, date, depth. The deeper I dug, the sweeter and rusty the smell, like oxidizing blood. One afternoon, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the slab, a rectangular cavity about the size of 15 centimeters by 25. Inside, a brittle diary wrapped in oilcloth. The cover bore name and date: Thomas Crosswell, born 19th of April, 1922. The handwriting was precise, soft curves forming everyday words, but toward the end it became hasty, shaky. The final entry: tonight they come. Roman numeral 13 demands. I am not afraid. No date. Just that sentence, then blank olive-toned pages. At that moment I knew the ritual had resumed when I arrived. That somehow, I did not know how, I had been integrated into the cycle. The land recognized me as inheritor, but something more ancestral than mere ownership. By the end of Block 2, the stage is set. I have uncovered letters, death registers, diaries, hidden compartments. I know the symbol, the recurring name, the community's silence. I have marked the first cycle of investigation. In Block 3, I will dive into old photographs, more diaries, retrieved documents, and the accidental pattern spanning generations. Patterns will emerge, names will repeat, the macabre chronology will coalesce. The diary of Thomas Crosswell, dated with no year, ending in a cryptic reference to Roman numeral 13, did more than unsettle me. It became an anchor. Its pages, though sparse, hinted at something intergenerational, obsessive. He referenced the ones before me and the pact made when grandfather stood at the altar. That altar, I was certain, was the moss-covered structure I had found beneath the trees, not more than 20 meters from the concrete slab. I returned there with a crowbar and a flashlight. Carefully removing loose stones around its base, I discovered a hollow cavity, an ossuary, I believe now. Inside, 3 skulls, each with a faint carving above the brow, the same inverted C. One skull had the number 3 etched below it. No names, just the pattern. I placed them back. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. Something in me knew the arrangement, the meaning, as if I were remembering, not discovering. I visited the County Historical Society that same week. Their records were incomplete. Many files relating to the Crosswell family had been removed or blacked out. But one ledger, mislabeled under Agricultural Census 1911, contained pressed between its pages a sepia-toned photograph. It showed a large group gathered in front of the Crosswell homestead. In the center, a boy, perhaps 10 years old, stood with an unreadable expression, scribbled on the back in graphite, Thomas, pre-selection, selection. I found other photographs in local antique shops, estate auctions, always unmarked, but I began to recognize faces, features that repeated across decades. High cheekbones, pale eyes, the same cleft chin. It wasn't just that names repeated, Thomas, Vernon, Abigail, Ruth, but faces returned, as if each generation yielded its own echo of the one before. The one constant, there was always a child slightly removed from the group, standing off-center, eyes not focused on the camera, always wearing something blue, a ribbon, a button, a collar. I began sorting the materials chronologically. The pattern was maddeningly precise. In the year 1872, Ruth Crosswell vanished on the night of a lunar eclipse. No remains were found. In 1892, twin boys, both named Thomas, a strange anomaly, died within 1 week of their 13th birthday. Their death certificates cited natural causes. In 1915, Vernon Crosswell reportedly went mad and dug trenches throughout the property before being institutionalized. He carved the same reversed C symbols into his arms. I found a photograph from the asylum labeled Patient V3. In 1935, no recorded death, but an article pulled from the archives of the Pocono Herald reported strange processions at dusk near the Crosswell property. Witnesses claimed to hear chanting and described a bonfire of animal stench. Each entry led to another, like teeth in a hidden mechanism. I compiled them into a binder, hand-numbered with my own annotations. Page 113, The Crosswell Covenant, a hand-copied excerpt from a crumbling journal found in the back of a locked drawer at the Historical Society. I wasn't supposed to be back there, but the archivist, an old man named Harlan, simply said, "If you're going to open it fully." The excerpt read, "We shall pass the blood forward, 13 by 13. None may know the full name, only the purpose. The watcher signs in blue. The child walks last. The pact holds until the 13th cycle is complete and the shadow breaks at dawn." This 13th cycle phrase had emerged now across 3 centuries of documents. It wasn't just a number, it was a schedule. I created a timeline. Every 13 years, a selection. Every 13th cycle, something reset. It explained the voids in public record. The Crosswell lineage did not merely endure, it recycled. The town allowed it, enabled it. I began to suspect that even the house fire in 1991 wasn't accidental. County fire reports filed under undetermined origin included a single photo of charred beams arranged unnaturally, converging at a central spot. The caption read, "Combustion unlikely, possible accelerant, symbol visible." That symbol was sketched in pen, 3 inverted C's enclosing a single point. Again, then came the letters. Found inside a second hidden panel beneath the stairs of what had once been the barn structure, now only rotting beams, I recovered a bundle of correspondences tied with a black ribbon. Dates ranged from 1867 to 1982. All were addressed to members of the Crosswell family, though many were unsigned. Some were written in archaic script, referencing the sowing of the red season, the lunar debt, and most chillingly, the vessel child must not be named before moonrise. But one letter, dated 28th of October, 1959, was addressed to Thomas, age 9. It read, "When your time nears, you must walk blindfolded to the stone. Do not speak, even if the voice comes from behind you. It will not be me. It never is. Your silence preserves the gate." I held that letter for hours. My hands ached. My breath grew shallow. I felt something pressing against my mind. Not madness, not possession, but recognition. My name is not Thomas, and yet my mother's maiden name, Crosswell. It all aligned. The property deed, the pattern, the dreams, the diary. I was not a stranger who had wandered into this legacy. I was its continuation. It was never my plan to become an investigative journalist. But by the time I had read the letter addressed to Thomas, a child instructed to walk blindfolded toward a ritual stone, I realized this was not just family history. It was a buried operation, layered in silence, sustained across generations. The only path forward was to expose it, even if it meant prying open every sealed mouth in Monroe County. I contacted the Pocono Herald, the local paper referenced in the chilling article from the year 1935. The current managing editor, a woman named Elisa Drew, agreed to meet. When I mentioned the Crosswell estate, her brow furrowed, and she said something curious. "You are not the first to ask." She led me into the basement archive, where the walls were lined with yellowed files, reels of microfilm, and 2 cabinets labeled Civic Objections, Restricted. Inside were clippings never published, marked with grease pencil, "Do not print." Among them, an editorial draft dated the 14th of May, year 1974, titled, "Where Have They Gone?" The story mentioned a string of disappearances near the Crosswell land, all children, all within weeks of each other. The editorial writer, one Gabriel Moss, claimed to have received anonymous photographs and maps, but vanished days before publication. His column was replaced with an article about township tax reforms. I tracked down Gabriel's niece, Lorraine, now in her 60s. She lived in a weather-worn house 2 towns over. When I arrived, she did not answer the door at first, but as I turned to leave, she called out from an upstairs window, "You found his notebook, did you not?" She let me in, and we sat in a narrow kitchen surrounded by jars of canned peaches and old calendars. "My uncle knew," she said. "They warned him once. Then he disappeared. They called it an accident, some fall near the lake. But he was found with no bruises, just wet, cold, and in his coat pocket, his notebook, blank, pages removed." I asked who she meant by they. She leaned forward, voice low. "The Circle of the 13th. They are not in robes. They are not cloaked. They sit on school boards. They manage zoning. They deny permits and approve land shifts. It is generational. The town owes them. The Circle of the 13th. I heard that phrase again from a retired fire inspector named Charles Emmett, now living in a camper behind his son's house. He had been the first to arrive at the Crosswell fire in the year 1991. He showed me his original field notes, kept against orders. "I saw it with my own eyes," he said. "The beams, they did not collapse randomly. They were placed, like spokes, around a stone center, and in the middle was a ring of ash, small bones, teeth, too small to be adult, and no fire spreads inward like that. Not natural." He claimed the fire marshal was pressured to write undetermined origin. He even remembered who gave the order, Sheriff Thomas Adler. The name chilled me. That name again, Thomas. I visited the county clerk's office. Public records had been modified. Adler's term as sheriff was listed from the year 1976 to 1993, but there were no photographs, no signature on file. One of the clerks, a young man with a pale expression, whispered when I asked. He was not elected. He was appointed, temporarily, after the last sheriff disappeared. I asked for that sheriff's name. He refused to answer. I compiled a list of all known disappearances near the Crosswell estate dating back to the early 19th century. The number was staggering, 41 in total, always spaced by increments of 13 years, always occurring near the new moon, always silenced. I spoke with one final witness, a woman named Esther Clemens, aged 92, bedridden in a home just outside Tobyhanna. When I mentioned the Crosswells, her hands trembled. She insisted I close the window. "Do you see it?" she asked, pointing to a photograph on the nightstand. The photo was of a Sunday school class, dated the year 1939. She was the only girl, and behind the children stood a tall man, dressed in black, holding a book. "He made us say the words," she whispered. "The 13th verse, from the Book of Echoes. It is not in the Bible. It was their own scripture." I asked what the verse said. She shut her eyes and recited, voice thin as thread, "By ash and oath we name the stone. The child walks, the gate is grown. 13 marks in bone and breath. We silence birth to silence death." By the end of this investigation, I had documents, maps, journals, testimonies, photographs, fire records, missing persons reports, and even liturgical verse from a non-existent religious text. The community had been actively sustaining a centuries-old rite of sacrifice, each generation trading silence for survival. Each participant inherited the duty to look away. Those who resisted, like Gabriel Moss, were erased. The Crosswell estate was not just cursed land. It was the altar of a living ritual, one designed not for worship, but for transaction. And my arrival, by blood or by fate, had signaled the next collection. I returned to the Crosswell land on the night of the new moon. It was no longer coincidence, it was compliance. Everything I had unearthed pointed to this moment, the 13th day of the harvest month, the 13th new moon since my arrival, the 13th generation since Vernon Crosswell's final entry. I had reached the center of the pattern, and now the ritual, whatever it truly was, demanded fulfillment. The altar I had unearthed weeks ago was not a monument, it was a lid. I brought tools, lanterns, gloves, rope, a crowbar, a recorder, and 3 sealed letters, one for the police, one for the press, and one for a woman named Lorraine Moss. I did not expect to return, but I needed the truth documented in case I failed to speak again. With steady force, I loosened the moss-covered stones that crowned the altar's base. Beneath the final slab, embedded in packed soil, was a handle, iron, rusted but intact. I pulled. The earth moaned. A circular hatch opened with a sharp breath of stagnant air. Below it, darkness, absolute and waiting. I descended slowly. The stone staircase spiraled into the earth, carved with symbols I now recognized. 13 slashes, forming a circle, 3 reversed C's surrounding a dot, and the phrase etched again and again, by ash and oath. There were 113 steps before the chamber revealed itself. It was larger than I imagined, 10 meters across, perfectly round. The walls were covered in black stone, polished to a mirror sheen, yet nothing reflected. The floor bore a shallow depression shaped like an open hand. In the center, a basin carved from what looked like calcified ivory, veined with blue-black lines. Around the basin, 13 alcoves, each containing a skeletal figure, everyone positioned identically, knees bent, arms extended, heads tilted back, skulls branded with the same sigil, Roman numeral 13, carved beneath the left eye socket. I moved carefully, documenting everything, every alcove, every glyph. I whispered dates aloud to the recorder. These were not random bodies, they were offerings, 13 generations, 13 rituals, each face long gone, yet eerily familiar. The basin began to hum. No, not hum, resonate, like a throat preparing to speak. The air thickened, vibrating with pressure that had no source. Then, as if a switch were thrown, the room lit from within. Blue light spilled from the walls. The carvings pulsed, the skeletons twitched, and a voice, not external but projected into me, spoke. The 13th has returned. The blood answers the basin. The circle is not broken. I tried to step back, but the stone resisted movement. My limbs trembled. I dropped to one knee. A sharp pain bloomed in my ribs, then in my skull. My thoughts splintered. Visions cascaded. I saw the first ritual. In the year 1784, a child placed upon the altar, weeping into silence, surrounded by hooded kin bearing lanterns made of bone. I saw the cycle repeated in 1835, then again in 1887. Every 13 years, always a child from the bloodline, always during the dark moon, always accompanied by the same chant, one must feed for 13 to thrive. I saw my grandfather, his face younger, panicked, standing at the same basin in the year 1961, offering his own voice in exchange for his son's life. My father, and now, me. The voice spoke again. The seed must become the root, 13 become one. The debt of bone and silence must be paid. I stood, barely able to move. My hands no longer felt like mine. My skin burned along the veins. I stumbled toward the basin. Its surface rippled, though no liquid filled it. And then, they emerged. From the alcoves, one by one, figures rose. Not living, not corpses, preserved in something beyond flesh. Each bore a fragment of my face. Not replicas, but relatives. Shades of resemblance from every generation. The Thomas of 1922. The Ruth of 1872. Vernon, Abigail. Names I had found in diaries, etched into photographs, whispered in dreams. The 13 stood around the basin, encircling me. Their eyes did not blink. Their mouths moved without sound. One held a book bound in blue thread. One held a blade made of flint and something darker. One held a mask. The old man stepped forward, tall, emaciated, branded with the reversed C's, the marks scorched into his cheeks. "You came home," he said. "I never meant to," I answered. "You were called, not by blood, by debt. The watcher is chosen by need, not will." He handed me the mask. It was stone, shaped like a face I barely recognized. Mine, aged, distorted. It weighed more than it should have. When I touched it, I heard voices, hundreds of voices, crying, praying, begging. "When you wear this, you remember, you forget, you become." The The basin began to glow. The 13th figure extended its arms toward me. It was not just a ritual of sacrifice. It was assimilation. The 13th inheritor did not die. He became the mechanism, the anchor, the one who held the memory, the one who forgot for everyone else. I turned to run, but my legs buckled. The room narrowed. The air pulled inward like a breath before a scream. One of them stepped forward, the child version of me. He smiled, and in his hand, the locket my mother had worn when she died. They had prepared me since birth. Every whisper, every dream, every instinct that led me here was carved before I was born. "Say the verse," the old man whispered, and I did. Not because I believed, but because I had no choice. It was already inside me. By ash and oath we name the stone. The child walks, the gate is grown. 13 marks in bone and breath. We silence birth to silence death. The basin opened, not physically, but conceptually. I cannot describe what I saw, not clearly, only that I was pulled in, not my body, myself, a tearing, a folding, and then I was watching myself place the mask, watching myself become the next watcher. I awoke outside, lying at the edge of the tree line where the altar once stood. My throat burned with the taste of earth, and the bones in my hands felt strained, as if I had carried something heavy through time. Morning light filtered weakly through the skeletal canopy of autumn trees. Fog clung low to the ground like reluctant ghosts returning to sleep. I was barefoot, shivering, dressed in soil-streaked clothes. Beside me lay the cracked mask, its stone surface now split clean down the center. The hatch that had led below was gone. In its place, only moss and stone. No sign of excavation, no mark on the ground, only a faint circle of dead leaves, darker than the rest. But I remembered everything. The bones, the chanting, the basin, the 13, the old man, the child that wore my face. I remembered the verse carved into the walls in reverse, and the taste of forgetting when I placed the mask. I remembered the silence that had teeth. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the road. That night I laid out everything on my kitchen table. Copies of birth records, fire reports, photographs, and diary entries. I had scanned the Thomas Crosswell journal. I had digital files of the gravestones with the inverted C motif. I had a page of the ritual verse, handwritten in 13 distinct scripts, one for each generation. My laptop contained an organized archive of everything. I created 3 encrypted backups. One was stored on a cloud drive under a false name. The second, I mailed to a friend in Pittsburgh. The third, I printed and sealed inside a fireproof envelope. Then I wrote 3 letters, one for the local police, one for a regional news outlet, and one for Lorraine Moss. The next morning, I walked into the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. A deputy named Marcus Adler met me at the desk. Adler, that name again. Another Thomas, another Adler, another seed from the circle. He looked at me, then at the documents I had stacked on the counter. "I want to file a report," I said. He didn't even glance down. "No need," he replied softly. "That property's being cleared next week. Already approved." I asked him how he knew. He smiled without warmth. "The county's on schedule." I left. That night I received a call from Elisa Drew at the Pocono Herald. She had reviewed my email, seen the documents, and wanted to meet. "Come after dark," she said. Less eyes. I arrived at the side entrance of the office. She unlocked the door herself. Her hands trembled. "You found the root," she whispered, "but the tree is older than you imagine." She led me into a records room I hadn't seen before, sealed by a vault door. Inside, 2 file cabinets labeled Unprinted Truths, and a worn corkboard covered in photographs. 13 black and white images of the Crosswell homestead, each one dated exactly 13 years apart, from the year 1872 to 1931. The final photo showed no house, just a smoking field. Elisa told me a story. "My great-grandfather ran this paper during the fire in the year 1991. He tried to publish a front-page article about local sacrifice rites and was fired within 24 hours. His house burned that same week. The story never ran." She paused. "He called them the Whispering 13. Said they came at night, never together, always in blue. Said they offered protection if he stayed silent." I handed her the mask. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a photo of it on her desk. She printed that photo and taped it to the corkboard. It joined the others. Beneath it, she wrote in red ink, "The witness returns. We agreed to move forward together." That weekend, she ran a digital-only article titled "The Crosswell Record, Generations of Ritual in Monroe County." It included 1 photograph, 1 diary excerpt, and 1 historical birth record. Within 4 hours, the page was taken down. She received a cease and desist from a firm in Harrisburg. She tried to appeal. Her editor removed her. I visited the property again that Sunday. Heavy equipment stood at the edge of the land. Bulldozers, dump trucks, soil drills. A new sign had been posted. Development site, future wellness retreat. Trespassing prohibited. Property of Luxovia Group. I looked them up. Luxovia Group was not listed anywhere on state business registries. Their only visible project, Crosswell Recovery Center, opening soon. The name had become branding, not even myth, wellness. I went to the township hall. I demanded to speak to a zoning official. A man in a blue vest met me in the hall. His name tag read Thomas K. He shook my hand firmly and said, "We honor history here, and we manage it carefully." I asked about permits. He said, "All 13 were signed." The number rang through me like iron across bone. I left without another word. That night, someone slid an envelope under my door. Inside, a single scrap of paper. "You wore the mask. You remember now. That is your purpose. Others forget. That is their peace." It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched the diary of Thomas Crosswell. The ink was fresh. 2 days later, I received a message from Lorraine Moss. She had gone to visit the burned ruins of the house where her uncle Gabriel had lived. What she found under the hearthstone changed everything. A lockbox containing undeveloped film, one preserved journal entry, and a child's drawing. The film showed 13 figures in blue robes standing in a circle, inside the same stone chamber I had entered. The photo was dated 1959. The journal page was Gabriel's handwriting. "They are older than the town, older than the land. They built this place after they buried the first. Every 13 years, one seed is harvested. Every 13th cycle, the root is fed, the basin drinks. The mask seals the truth, and the truth must not echo." The drawing was by a child named Ruth. It showed a figure in a blue robe carrying a small lantern shaped like a skull. Beneath it, the child had written, "He said he would come back in my dreams. He said I would be the next." Lorraine was ready to go public. She took the evidence to a retired state investigator named Daniel Calloway, who once worked on missing persons cases in this region during the early 1980s. He told her quietly, "You are not the first, and you won't be the last. We opened a case once. It vanished. We found paperwork burned. Witnesses moved. One was institutionalized. The rest recanted." She asked if he believed her. He said, "I was born on the 13th of April. My grandmother was a Crosswell. We are not alone, but they are more powerful. This is no longer a secret. It is an agreement. A covenant etched into the very soil, every building, every nameplate, every land transfer, all part of the ritual. A ritual disguised as governance, a sacrifice buried beneath tax filings and zoning codes. They erased the altar, but not the memory. They silenced the witnesses, but not the watchers. I walk now not as myself, but as the 13th iteration of a role older than my blood. I remember. So, you do not have to. But if you see the symbol carved in stone, if someone offers you a mask, if a man in blue whispers that you were chosen, run, because some rituals do not end. They only wait." I expected silence after the failed exposé, the kind of suffocating silence that buries truth beneath paperwork, bureaucracy, and ritual compliance. And for 13 days, that's exactly what happened. The local news made no mention of Crosswell. The land, according to the Pocono Township office, was undergoing soil renewal for a future wellness initiative. Elisa Drew's article disappeared from all archives, and the photographs Lorraine Moss and I circulated online were flagged as manipulated content. My posts were removed. Accounts were suspended. Someone was watching every outlet, sealing every crack. But truth, when contaminated by myth, has a way of spreading. On the 14th day, I received an email from a woman in Massachusetts. She claimed to have found the Crosswell symbol carved into the lintel beam of a barn on her family's estate, built in the year 1891. Her great-grandfather's name, Thomas W. Crosswell. She attached a photo of the carving, 3 reversed C's surrounding a small puncture in the wood. The caption read, "We always thought it was ornamental. Now I'm not so sure." Then came another message, from Quebec. A graduate student in religious anthropology wrote, "Your basin sketches match a funerary monument in Saint-Félix-de-Valois, built circa 1870. The same blue thread motif. I've documented 4 more symbols in the surrounding parishes." By the end of the month, I had received over 50 emails from across North America and Europe, some from historians, some from genealogists, some from people who had simply dreamed of the mask. They called themselves echoes. Some claimed to hear whispers in abandoned buildings. Others sent diary pages, written by children, always aged 13, describing dreams of staircases, circles, and the basin of silence. One message came from an archivist in southern Wales. We uncovered a sealed box behind a church wall. Inside, a candle made of blue wax, a small jawbone, and a folded note reading, "The child was given. The 13th cycle closes. Prepare again." It was dated year 1865. The rituals were not limited to Monroe County. They were a pattern, a network, and the more we uncovered, the more fractures appeared in the official record. State records in Pennsylvania began to show anomalies, census gaps, contradictory death certificates, vanishing children whose case files had been lost in reorganization. Lorraine Moss compiled a database. Within 2 months, we had cataloged 247 missing minors over a span of 180 years, all in regions where the Crosswell pattern had surfaced, all multiples of 13. Each one occurred on or near the new moon in the month of harvest. I returned to the Crosswell property. Where the foundation once stood, a steel fence now enclosed the area. Signs warned of chemical treatment and unstable terrain. Surveillance cameras blinked, but I noticed something stranger. Every 13th tree in the surrounding grove had been marked with blue chalk. That same day, a friend from the Historical Society contacted me. He had found a sealed ledger in a mislabeled box of colonial sermons. Its cover was etched with the Crosswell symbol. Inside, a handwritten genealogy stretching back to the year 1666. At the center of every generation, one name repeated: Thomas. The signature at the bottom read, "The Watcher of the 13th Root." Then the disappearances began again. Not children, adults, people who had reached out publicly, whistleblowers, archivists, journalists. Elisa Drew's phone was disconnected, her apartment emptied. Lorraine's home was broken into. Only one file was taken, the one containing the unedited photo of the underground chamber. Police filed no reports. I was followed. I noticed a blue thread tied to my car's side mirror one morning. A single word was carved into the passenger side window: Echo. It was both a threat and a reminder. They were still watching, but the more they erased, the more people remembered. A cultural shift began, not formal, but underground. Academic forums published speculative studies on folk convergence rituals. Podcasts picked up fragments of the story. One series, The 13th Hollow, reached over 500,000 listeners before it was mysteriously removed. Books were pulled from shelves. A fiction novel titled The Mask of Blue Silence, published in the 1990s, suddenly became a cult item. It mirrored the Crosswell pattern in uncanny detail: 13 cycles, child offerings, inverted sigils. The author, Thomas E. Cross. No public appearances, no interviews, and no known death date. When people tried to contact him, they received the same automated response: "Memory must be curated. You are not the one." This isn't conspiracy theory. It's legacy management. Communities along the ritual lines began reporting strange occurrences: flickering lights on new moon nights, crop circles shaped like the Crosswell Basin, chalk markings reappearing after storms. At least 3 towns declared certain wooded areas as private cultural land, closed to the public, citing ancestral agreements. We now suspect that over 30 counties across 8 states are part of the system. We call it the Basin Arc. Every 13 years, a vessel is selected. Every 13th cycle, a watcher is appointed. And when the watcher remembers, the ritual continues. But cracks are forming. A former city planner from New York reached out anonymously. We received 13 sealed requests for property easements in the Hudson Valley, all approved in the same day. Each one matched a Crosswell coordinate. When I questioned it, my access was revoked. An elementary school teacher in Indiana reported students repeating phrases from the Crosswell verse, despite never being taught the words. One child wrote the chant on her desk in blue marker. When asked why, she replied, "He told me to, the man who walks backward." We are no longer chasing the story. We are living within it. I now receive packages without return addresses, soil samples, feathers tied in blue thread, wax-sealed envelopes with 13th century maps. A box arrived last week containing a stone shard. When I touched it, I dreamt of the chamber again. But this time it was not empty. The basin was full, and 13 faces watched me from the alcoves. Only one face was mine. I do not know how this ends. Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps the ritual never intended to be completed, only continued. Sustained through forgetting, inherited through blood, enacted through whispers and bureaucratic concealment. But now there are too many voices, too many who have seen the mask, too many who carry the mark. And the 13th cycle approaches once more. I no longer live under my name. I rent a room above a bookstore in a town too small for maps and too quiet for questions. My windows face a row of poplars, and at night I listen for footsteps I cannot prove. There are no more visits, no more letters, but I still see them, in the corners of reflections, in the smudges on glass. The 13 never leave, they only wait. Some days I tell myself none of it was real, that it was grief, obsession, madness stitched to coincidence, that the ritual was metaphor, that the bones were just old history misread, that the basin never drank anything but water and myth. But then I find blue thread on the floor, tied into loops, always in sets of 13. I've tried burning the documents. They return. I've buried the mask in 4 different places. It always comes back. It's not the physical weight of the ritual that haunts me. It's the memory. Because once you've worn the mask, you never forget. That's the cost. That's the bargain. You carry the forgetting for everyone else. You become the silence that protects the illusion of normal life. And in return, the ritual spares the world from what lies beneath it. There are days I envy the others, those who vanished, who walked blindfolded into the dark and were never seen again. They had a role. They had an end. I remain, watching, recording, remembering, because someone has to. Someone always has to. I still keep my archives, now scattered across different drives, disguised beneath innocuous names. The echoes are still out there, quiet, waiting. Some have gone into hiding. Others work from within. Libraries, county offices, zoning commissions. You'd never know their names, but they remember. And that's all the ritual needs, memory. Once long ago, I asked the figure at the altar why the ritual continued. He said, because memory is the only real form of immortality, and someone must bear it, even if no one wants to. I carry that sentence like a splinter in my mind. I don't dream anymore, not naturally. My dreams are inherited now, passed to me like heirlooms from those who walked before. Sometimes I dream in other people's eyes. Sometimes I dream from beneath the basin. Looking up, the 13th cycle nears again. Somewhere, a child is already being marked. A door frame bears the scratched symbol. The blue wax is being poured, and someone, somewhere, is starting to hear the verse without knowing what it means. We tell ourselves we've moved beyond sacrifice. That modernity cures ritual. But the truth is, ritual has adapted. It lives in corporate mergers, in construction plans, in digital signatures, and erased birth records. The Crosswell legacy doesn't need fire anymore. It has paperwork and the silence of 1,000 people who chose comfort over truth. So if you find a photograph with a missing face, if your child dreams of a spiral staircase, if you hear 13 knocks and no one is there, remember this. It is not your imagination. It is the inheritance calling. And if someone offers you a mask, do not accept it, unless you're prepared to remember everything, forever. If this story reached you, if it stirred something you weren't ready to remember, don't let it end in silence. Share it, speak it, leave a trace, and subscribe to the channel. There are many names still hidden, and someone must carry them. Someone always must.